up, I'll just introduce our next speaker, which is Ceenu George, and she's presenting a paper titled Fearing Disengagement from the Real World, Exploring Non-Experts' Mental Model and Expectations of Mobile Virtual Reality.
Right. Hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Ceenu George from LMU Munich in Germany. I did this work with Julia, who is a student at our institution, and Heinrich, who's our head of department. So to start, I'd like you to think about a situation where smartphones disrupted a social setting. So think about it for 10 seconds by yourself. A situation where two people were together or where you were with other people and that situation changed when the smartphone was introduced. I'm sure there are plenty. Okay. These talks are usually not interactive, but I still ask, does someone want to share? Yeah, sure.
Like at a cafe or a restaurant, you're kind of sitting across from each other and then you bring up the phone.
Yeah, exactly, for example. So I'll make it easy. So one of the things that happens to me quite often is exactly in the cafe, we order something, the food comes, and suddenly at least half of the people start taking a picture of the food first before they even start eating, or saying, in Germany we say, okay, have a nice meal or something, right? So, and there are other situations that I put in here. A couple of weeks ago I went to a concert and there were a lot of people taking videos throughout the whole of the time of the concert, right? Rather than enjoying the concert itself and dancing, etc., the phone was taken out every once in a while to take a video of parts of the concert. So, and then the one at the bottom, I used to read a lot when I was going to sleep to fall asleep easier, etc. Now I usually have my phone in my head because my kid's sleeping next to me and I can't read with the light on, so I have to use the phone, etc. So the mobile phone definitely disrupted a lot of the social settings that we're in. And with that in the back of our heads, I'd like to basically move on to HMDs and specifically mobile head-mounted displays with smartphones. And mobile VR is also becoming more and more common, right? The vision that we have as in the VR industry is that people will be using it in co-located settings, outside, in public, etc. So going back to the introduction, how will mobile VR disrupt these social settings? That's basically what we asked ourselves. We see this as the next big thing happening, right? And prior work hasn't necessarily focused on mobile VR, but focused on in-lab settings mainly. Guggenheimer looked at co-located interactions with high-end HMDs, where they were playing and a person in the real world who wasn't wearing a HMD was interacting with someone in VR wearing an HMD, and they were collaborating together on a game, for example. And Williamson looked, at the beginning of the year, presented her work on head-mounted displays in planes, so where people were using it as an entertaining system, and how it affected basically that social setting. Last year also, Alala et al. Presented their work on HMDs and the input modalities and the effects the input modalities have in social settings and in a public place. So with that in mind, the majority of the prior work that was done in this space was done in lab settings rather than in a public setting. So we wanted to understand what factors beyond the technical capabilities affect a co-located mobile VR experience with unknown non-HMD users in a public setting. So this is different to the work that was done previously. And I just want to take a step back and just show you where this work sits, because it's qualitative and the majority of the work that's presented here is usually quantitative. So this is early qualitative research that we did with non-experts, which is right here, but this is part of a bigger project where we look at social interactions between HMD users and non-HMD users. So going straight into the study itself, what we did is we did an explorative qualitative study. We interviewed 34 participants in public outdoor spaces. So we approached them while they were having a picnic in the park or waiting outside of the museum areas. So any public place that you can imagine where there are lots of people outside, and people, they were either in pairs or by themselves. The focus was just on the public setting. And we chose various methods within this study because mobile VR, as much as we want it to be used already, is at the moment a vision, right? We don't see a lot of people using it outside at the moment. So for us it was difficult to, we had to find a method where we could get people's understanding of it, of a vision. So rather than just evaluating the current mental model, we wanted them to think about how they would use it in the future in these settings. So for that we used a method called the story completion method. It's basically where you give participants at the beginning of a specific setting as a story, and then ask them to complete that story. So it's, when we think back, it's like when we were children and we had the first sentence of a story, and then you turn over the page and the next person completes the next sentence. It's that kind of thinking. And with that we wanted to get people to think about not what is currently happening with mobile VR, but what could happen in the future in these settings that I described earlier in the introduction. We also used a drawing task. So for people who had difficulties verbalizing what they thought about mobile VR, we thought that a drawing task would basically get their mental model of that experience onto paper. And finally, we used standardized questionnaires, a technology acceptance questionnaire and a social awareness questionnaire also, to get further data. Here is an example of the drawings that were made. I won't go into the details of the drawing, but go straight into the results from the thematic analysis. So we were two researchers who coded the interviews with the 34 participants, and we did this iteratively, and we did a thematic analysis on the transcripts and came up with this basically. And what you see here is we try to quantify the themes that came out of it. So the ones that are that take up more space in the diagram are basically the ones that were mentioned more frequently. So, and there is also a difference in the color themes. I'll go more detail into it in the paper. But basically, because we used different methods, what we also wanted to understand is which of the methods lead to the same factors that influence such an experience, and which methods come up with different factors. So that's what the diagram represents. And out of this, we came up with a number of themes that I'm basically discussing in the paper, and I'd like to show you some of the themes that we discussed in the paper today. So first of all, I'd like to read out some of the comments that the participants made. So, participant 6 explained that people could disengage from reality, be away the whole weekend in some unreal worlds which have nothing to do with the personal life. Participant 25 mentioned, giant crabs approach him. He quickly steps behind a rock ledge. It is scary. Fully aware that he's standing in his own living room, he's feeling uneasy. So we put this under the theme balancing presence and immersion. Participants seem to fear that they were not capable of taking the HMD off when they have a high presence. So a lot of participants, although they seek situations where they wanted to be in a high presence state, were also scared that they weren't able to get out of that high presence state. And some participants mentioned that although, for example, the giant crab was approaching, none of them mentioned that they wanted to take the HMD off or that they were scared in that situation, right? Although they were standing in their living room, basically. Yeah, so we are suggesting in the paper that there should be alternative means for exiting rather than solely relying on the user to take off the HMD. And what I mean with this is, we go back to the smartphone that I started in the introduction with. In the smartphone, for example, we can see that a lot of applications use things like infinite scrolling. So, for example, Facebook is basically when you scroll, it never ends. You can continuously stay in there, and that's what the people who created the applications want you to do. They want you to continuously stay within that application. But what I'd like to basically discuss is whether that's really benefiting the user, right? Is it benefiting the user from a digital health perspective? And with HMDs, we're at a point where we can actually design for these interactions to be benefiting the user from a well-being and digital health perspective, rather than just focusing on them being present in VR and increasing the presence as much as possible and supporting that the HMD is not being taken off. Another topic we're discussing in the paper is empowering the user to decide how much presence they want to gain in a specific context. So again, presence is as much as users wanted to gain high presence, we are questioning or we're discussing whether in co-located public settings, presence is really the key factor that needs to be as high as possible. So can we make it that it's adaptive? So in a public setting, can we say, okay, the user is in a public setting, let's try and reduce the presence and maybe make him aware more of the real world and what's happening outside? And or can we make the system decide that the user is getting to a stage where there is too much a state where they have reached too much high presence, and we need to pull him out of there because he's anxious about it, for example. And finally, another discussion point or a question that we're raising is, can we create solutions that allow people to transfer between the worlds while maintaining presence? So there is some early work from Williamson that I mentioned earlier, where she discusses that when you're in a plane and you're using the entertainment system, that you still want to be aware of the real world. And she discusses that by saying, okay, maybe a solution is to have a window to the real world that's somewhere within your VR system that you can look into and you see the outside. And we want to pick up on that thought and basically discuss what effects does it have on the user when he keeps the HMD off and transfers back and forth between these worlds. What effect does that have on the presence in VR, but also how do we measure the presence in the real world? Is that a success measure also for mobile VR in co-located settings? Another theme that we discuss is privacy. as an unvoiced concern. So P4, who put Alex on the toilet before their VR experience, emphasizing the intimacy of that moment and therefore not leaving him vulnerable to the outside world. Alex locked the door to his room. Alex is in a completely empty room without anything and anyone. And finally, P4 again, he is touched, a warm feeling. His mother carefully removes the HMD and looks at her sweaty boy in the bathroom, shocked. So P4 is in the toilet and he's being rescued by his mother, right? So that's already contradictory as it is. So the participants were seeking privacy while they were using HMDs, but they were also lonely and scared as much as that they wanted someone in the toilet to rescue them, specifically their mother. So in this work, we basically found out that privacy in the context of mobile VR focuses on observability, but also expands to physical integrity. How safe am I in the environment that I'm in? And with VR, this factor was mentioned quite frequently, that although they were in VR and they were having a lot of fun, they either tripped over something, and these were people, non-experts, right, who hadn't used VR before, who were basically introduced to it as part of the study for the first time, and they were still thinking about tripping over things and people approaching them randomly, etc., etc. And so what we also basically put out to discuss is, can we improve the mobile VR experience by catering for privacy and physical integrity concerns? At the moment, a lot of the VR applications are measured based on presence mainly, and enjoyment maybe, but in a co-located setting, physical integrity and privacy are one of the key factors that we think need to be considered. So how can we standardize this so that it can be measured? And finally, social acceptability. When Alex took off his HMD, he saw that the neighbor was laughing out loud about Alex's first reaction. I'm not going to go in more detail into the social acceptability aspect of this, because we were able to basically confirm prior work that looked into social acceptability, and our results suggest that when accompanied by friends and family, the public setting becomes more attractive. And we're basically confirming prior work by Guggenheimer, and we're questioning whether we can transfer this into the public setting and would get the same results. So we believe that we would get the same results as long as people that we're co-located with are friends and family. And what effect does it have when we embed this into a social setting, and how can we design for it from an HCI perspective? That's another question that we're basically asking as part of the results. So as I said at the beginning, our idea with this work was to explore the space of mobile virtual reality in co-located settings. And at the end of this, we wanted to come out with discussion points and research questions that we wanted to focus on, rather than just on the technical capabilities of the system. And we're discussing in the paper also that these different methods that we used gave us different factors. And some of them have similarities, but specifically the story completion method allowed us to tap into basically what non-experts think of mobile VR, although it isn't used at the moment in social settings. And we recommend this for systems, for example, for smart home applications. Also, we're trying to use that method in smart home applications and factors that people think affect those applications, and we think that that's a good tool to basically recommend it as a tool to be used for systems that are not currently actively used, but that we envision to be used, and to involve non-experts in this scenario. So to summarize, within social settings, we basically prioritize the following factors: privacy and physical integrity, and how we can measure and include it as a standard when we're measuring the success of applications for mobile VR, and balancing presence in the real and the virtual world, and how we can measure basically presence in the real world as well as in VR, and the impact mobile VR has in social settings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the audience? I will go ahead and get us started. I think this is really interesting, and I think it's really something that we in the community need to be aware of, because if we go back and think about the thematic diagram that you had earlier in the talk, a lot of the terms that people associate with VR were not necessarily positive. There was, I believe I saw empowering and fun and control, but there was also boredom and stress and loneliness and fear and addiction. So that's not necessarily something that we can fix in short order, but I think it's something to be aware of as we hopefully want people to be using VR, that we need to be aware that there are these perceptions out there. But I guess that was just an aside. As a question, did you collect or consider collecting any demographic information to go along with these data? Because I would be interested to know whether age is a factor or that sort of thing in how people's opinions form about virtual reality, for example.
Yeah, in the paper we go in more detail into the demographics. So we basically found that age doesn't affect the adoption rate of VR or in people that we've interviewed. It's an explorative study, so it's very subjective to the people that we've interviewed, but age wasn't a factor within our study. Actually, people who were above 30 were as keen as people below 30 to use the technology. The issue was more about the usefulness and the digital stress that would be induced with the technology rather than age being a factor. Yeah. And just to add to your point from earlier, the reason I also started with the smartphone comparison is because I think with the smartphone we're now trying to backtrack, right, and figure out how we can resolve things like well-being and digital health, etc., and include it and make applications better that we're already using. And with HMDs we have this unique opportunity where we're actually at the forefront of, we know that it's going to be a disruptive system, so how can we actually design for it to be better for us as users, in considering privacy, physical integrity, users' well-being, digital health.
Thank you. Interesting paper. Can you say a bit more about how you selected the participants? I got the impression that you went out into public space and engaged with them there, and that's how you started your conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
And did you have a set of questions that you started with?
No, we just asked them if they wanted to take part in a VR study. Our prerequisite was that they weren't allowed to have any prior experience with VR, so that should be the first point of contact with it. Yeah. Yeah. We didn't have any problems recruiting participants. I think people are interested, right? The interest is there. It's just that the adoption rates don't reflect the interest.
One more, right up front.
Yeah, if that's okay. So I have a question regarding this adaptation. So if we compare this to mobile phone usage, I think by now some, like general public rules have been established. So if you have a formal dinner occasion, for example, you leave your phone in the pocket most of the time. And do you think this is also something that's going to be happening with mobile VR, so that these, general societal rules may be established over time? Or?
Yeah, definitely. I think there is definitely a part of it that will be established over time, right? But the mobile phone in the dinner example that you just said, even just putting out the mobile phone and turning it around, or knowing that your mobile phone is in your pocket and might vibrate, already affects that's what prior work says, already affects the conversation you're having. So yeah, there's definitely a part that we will adapt to, but I think there's a lot we can do knowing all of this from smartphone usage anyway, and from studies like these that we can do, yeah, before they get people adapt to these technologies.
So since you didn't really focus on the technology, when do you really think there could be fairly wide adoption of this technology, or the idea of mobile VR? And do you really feel it might be a stepwise function that we have to have more of adoption of mobile AR, then MR, and then VR, or could it really leap to VR? I don't know. What do you think? What do your studies kind of show?
I haven't looked into that specifically, so the variations of, as you said, AR, VR, etc. I think VR, as it is at the moment, is used in labs because it just doesn't allow us to engage with the real world. And we need some form of engagement with the real world, at least that's what our studies are showing, in order to adapt that technology. Or we at least need to feel safe, right, when we're using a technology. I don't think I can say anything more to that, but we can discuss it. But I don't have any data on it. I can just give you my opinions.
Have you seen any like big companies, Fortune 500 companies working on it, like Microsoft with HoloLens, Facebook, Oculus Rift? What about, well, Oculus Rift, maybe, I don't know. What do you think? Is anybody really trying to do this on a mobile basis?
Taking those systems outside, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're currently working on that. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, there are standalone systems, so you could take them outside. There are solutions that you could take outside. Yeah.
All right, if that's all we have, I think let's thank Ceenu one more time for her presentation.